What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to be looking at the Great League once again, and we're taking a look at a little core breaker, and that is Unovan Stunfisk. Now, Unovan Stunfisk is really unique in that it has ground and electric type coverage, which isn't very similar to anything else in the meta. It's also a very bulky Pokemon, however, it doesn't hit very hard, so it's not good enough to really 1v3 teams, so even if you do core break your opponents, it can be tricky to work out of those matchups. However, we've got two answers for its weaknesses in the back, and yes, that's right, you're seeing a Slurpuff on your screen. So without further ado, let's just hop right into some battles. Unovan Stunfisk finds a decent lead in the next match in Golisopod. This is pretty neutral as far as it goes because they have super effective Aqua Jets. However, with the buff this season, or the rework to discharge this season, we actually outpace because it takes 4 on the next turn. But my opponent overfarmed, so I decided to catch the Aqua Jet onto my own Golisopod, which means they waste a lot of energy. They can now go for an X-Scissor here, but that's okay. This still will not be enough to KO, and now they've used 0 energy on my Stunfisk, which is good. We've also lured out a Togetic, so already our first opponent is ABA weak to electric. So Stunfisk looks like it's going to have play into this team, and that makes sense as to why my opponent did not switch out of the lead, although it was neutral. I do get my 1 turn denied, which means I will have to throw my discharge right away. And discharge from this range, it looks like will not be enough to quite KO, but my opponent ends up committing a shield either way. I'm going to commit a shield right back because I do have a pacing advantage in this matchup. My opponent full sends a Dazzling Gleam, and then they have a Claydol in the back. Now this is going to be tricky because the Claydol, because they switched in first, will actually have an energy lead and get to the first charge move first. So I do have super effective Energy Ball, but unless I get the defense fall, this second one is not going to be enough to KO, and they will be able to outpace. It looks like it will get to the Energy Ball right before they get to their second Rock Tomb, however. And how much damage does this do? Nothing to the Claydol, because Claydol is so bulky. They do overfarm here, but they don't overfarm by much, maybe not being aware of Slurpuff's energy. However, that means I can come in with Stunfisk. I can throw 2 Thunder Shocks and then the Mud Bomb, so that way if this KOs, which unfortunately it doesn't, then that second Mud Slap wouldn't connect. They then come in with their Golisopod only to get Thundershock farm down, and now I have 2 discharges loaded for the Togetic, but they're not even going to survive 1, so just barely able to take the win with Unovan Stunfisk. Stunfisk in the next map picks up another good lead in Weezing, this time weak to the ground typing, and they safe switch into a Diggersby. Now, we have a pretty great response here for Diggersby because we have Golisopod, which neutralizes the Fire Punch, super effective on Bug while resisted on Water, which means it's net neutral, and then we resist ground because Bug resists ground, so they can't go for Scorching Sands. So they have to go for non-stab, really weak Fire Punches here, and we can survive at least 2 of those, it looks like, plus the quick attacks. So I am going to overfarm here. Playing to a CMP tie Aqua Jet from this range plus the Shadow Claws is enough to KO a Diggersby, and we do get that knockout. I will throw at the last second, going for the Aqua Jet. This will do some decent chip onto the Stunfisk, and now we maintain alignment, which is the most important, and now we have Slurpuff on a Pangoro in the back, and yeah, that's an instant top left for my opponent. Bit of a neutral lead in the next match, Unovan Stunfisk into Malamar. Now the best shielding situation for Stunfisk in this matchup is actually the zeros, because Stunfisk can barely live, I believe it's 2 foul plays, and just barely get to a 3rd Mud Bomb. You do want to go for Mud Bomb over Discharge in neutral situations like these, because Mud Bomb just is a better damage per energy move. It just does slightly more damage for the same amount of energy that Discharge has. So here you're going to see a second foul play plus the Psywaves, not enough to KO, and look, they're going for the Psywave farm down, but on 1 HP we live with the Stunfisk. I'm not sure if that's IV dependent. I do have a decent IV Stunfisk, but not the best, and they end up committing a shield, and I come in with my Slurpuff, and my opponent safe switches into a Diggersby. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to chip with an Energy Ball, and then probably pivot into my Golisopod, because Golisopod obviously can soak up this damage very comfortably. and this forces them to go for their non-stab fire punches. They're going to get to 3 here probably. Here comes a second, and I do want to overfarm because I don't want them to just be able to instantly switch back into their Malamar, which is, I probably doesn't have enough energy for a charge move, but I'm not sure. I don't remember. But yeah, actually, yeah, they banked a move. That's what it was, which is why I was overfarming, but my opponent ends up sniping anyways. So I'm going to double shield. I'm now going to make it to the Aqua Jet, and I'm at back to back, so my opponent can't shield this. I do go for an undercharge, but I'm unsuccessful, and it is a Blastoise in the back. So here comes an X-Scissor, and I have another bank. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot into my Slurpuff. If I can get to an Energy Ball and grab this last shield, then this game is over, and that's exactly what happens. Here comes the Energy Ball. My opponent has to shield this up, and because we have the X-Scissor banked, and because Gliscod wins CMP, this game is over. I believe Slurpuff ends up surviving a Hydro Cannon here, allowing for my opponent to get the farm down, but the move actually does show up, and we don't get 1-turn lag for once in a million, and we do connect with the X-Scissor, and we are able to take this win. Stunfisk into Drapion. Now this is an okay lead. I'd say it's a good lead, and my opponent ends up safe switching into a Corviknight. Excuse me, but I just thought that was funny because obviously Corviknight actually has a worse matchup than the Drapion does. Obviously my opponent is core broken by the unique ground electric typing, and they're not even on payback. So my opponent is only on resisted charge moves, and they do go for a Sky Attack as it is the better damage per energy move. I'm now at back-to-back discharges, so if my opponent wants to get off another charge move, they're going to have to shield. So now my opponent has double shielded in this matchup, and they're still not going to take switch because the Sky Attack will still not KO from this range unless they've been baiting this whole time and have a payback. I do overfarm slightly, now going for a discharge, and Stunfisk wins the 0-2 shield scenario against Corviknight. So in case you were wondering how much of a fraud Corviknight is, that is how much of a fraud. Sand attack user that loses the 2-0s. So either way, they come in with an Azumarill. I just stay in this matchup because I want to align my Slurpuff here, and that way I can align my Gliscod against their Drapion. I can let this first one go. It is the crunch. That does some sizable damage, but all I have to do here is throw the Aqua Jet on the CMP tie with the Aqua Tail, and as soon as this lands, this game is over, because Aqua Tail means they will be energy dry, and this will be enough to KO. So all I have to do is come out and get a full farm down of the Drapion. I can shield up one Aqua Tail, that's fine. I still have another shield loaded if I need it. In comes the Azumarill. They do actually have a charge move already. I can survive one charge move, so I may as well let this go. It's the Ice Beam. Here comes an Energy Ball. This will actually not be enough to KO the Azumarill, and I'm not exactly sure how much energy the Azumarill banked. And I end up over farming here a little bit too much, but that's okay because the Drapion is in Fairy Wind farm down range. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to farm up to basically back-to-back, still throwing on good timing, going over 100 energy, but I will be able to make it to another Energy Ball or Fairy Wind farm them down, and we do take that win. Into next match, we've got Stunfisk into Talonflame. So this is a fantastic lead. Obviously, Fly and Brave Bird are both resisted, and my opponent is staying in. So that means they're probably core broken with something in the back. Oftentimes, there is a water type in the back with a Talonflame, or if they're on the Morpeko plus grass core in the back, then Morpeko is obviously core broken in the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to overfarm as much as possible. They are actually on flame charge, so that is neutral damage. However, there's no even shield scenario that they could win this. So I will just match shields and then go for a full Thundershock farm down, and that last incinerate doesn't even register, which is nice. And look at that, it's the Feraligatr in the back, and we actually make it to back-to-back discharges before my opponent even is able to make it to one charge move. So there goes one shield. Here comes a discharge. This will connect and do some decent damage, and then I'm going to instantly pivot into my Gliscod. This actually forces my opponent to throw energy, which is nice, and that means a resisted Hydro comes my way, but they do have an Azumarill in the back, so this could get a tiny bit uncomfortable just because Gliscod, its charge moves are completely walled in this matchup. However, my opponent is inclined to go for a full farm down in order to come out with nearly back-to-back moves loaded because they do not know what my Pokemon is in the back. And while Slurpuff does have some decent bulk, it probably wouldn't be able to survive 2 player roughs from an Azumarill. However, they do end up just throwing their energy. And now that means I can just come in with the Slurpuff. All I have to do now is watch for a catch and just go for the energy ball, and that will be able to pick up the knockout. There is the catch attempt. I end up going for my own catch attempt, but because my opponent holds on to their energy, I get the Thundershock farm down. I have an energy ball banked for the Azumarill, so my opponent just resigns the match. Into the next match, another good lead, Galarian Weezing, and they switch into a Credilli. Now, Credilli is a little tough. I do not have a great answer for Credilli in the back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chip with a Mud Bomb first, and then I'm going to swap into my Slurpuff. Now, Slurpuff obviously doesn't take super effective damage from the Rock Tomb like Golisopod was, but Golisopod also has a super effective charge move, and it looks like because I gave them that energy lead, my opponent can actually outpace here and make it to 2 charge moves before I make it to 1, which is not good because 1 energy ball already would not be enough to KO the Credilli, but now that my attack is debuffed twice, it certainly will not be able to, and my opponent acts on the fact that our switch clocks are misaligned. They instantly pivot back into their Weezing, which is a nice play, but they end up not throwing on CMP, which allows me to come back in with the Stunfisk, and even if this is an overheat, it's not going to KO. It is the overheat. My opponent does full send that damage there, but I overfarm right before they make it to their second overheat, and now I will commit the Mud Bomb. Mud Bomb from this range picks up the knockout on the Weezing, and back in comes the Credilli. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go for a Mud Bomb. I actually grab a shield from my opponent, so now we're at an shield parity, which is nice. I will let this go because they will just go for the knockout. Actually, they go for a Rock Tomb, which allows me to go for a Mud Bomb, but my opponent makes a nice catch onto a Lapras in the back. However, unfortunately for my opponent, I have a complete wall to the energy from Lapras, unless of course they're on Skull Bash. That could be risky, but I'm willing to bet that my opponent is on Ice Beam. We are around Legend Elo, so most are on Sparkling Aria and Ice Beam. It is just the Sparkling Aria, so that leads me to believe that they're not on Skull Bash. Here comes a second X-Scissor from the Golisopod, still not quite enough to KO, which means I will have to commit a shield here. And now I'm going to instantly pivot, expecting my opponent to try and snipe with their Credilli, but they don't. They then come in with their Credilli. I am going to throw right before they get to a charge move. However, that means they might be able to get a Psywave farm down here, but it looks like they're in 1 Thundershock farm down range, so I come in with my Stunfisk. It forces my opponent to actually throw their energy. They might have been able to get a Psywave down. It would have been risky, but that means I can then come in with my Golisopod, get the full farm down, and we are able to take that win. Good lead in the next match. A lot of good leads, actually, come to think of it. And this opponent is actually staying in with the Drapion, so they're playing it out a little bit differently. They're going to go for an Aqua Tail and then Chip, and then they end up going for a catch attempt onto a Diggersby. I bank all of that energy, and then I come in with my Golisopod, which is nice. This is the alignment that we want. And my opponent does let that go. They do obviously have enough for a Fire Punch, so I can let this go. My opponent actually goes for a Scorching Sands, maybe fishing for that attack debuff so that the second Aqua Jet would not KO, which is actually kind of an interesting play for my opponent because they know Shadow Claws will not be enough to farm down. I can survive a Fire Punch from this range, so I will let this go. And they end up throwing another Scorching Sands. They do get the attack debuff, and then they come in with a Azumarill, which is a little bit rough because I do want to just stay in this matchup. Because I want to align my Stunfisk onto the Drapion, and I want to align the Slurpuff onto the Azumarill. So I'm just going to stay in this matchup. I'm debuffed. All of these attacks are resisted, but we still get the Azumarill nearly into the yellow. I will expect my opponent to just go for a charge move and then dip into their Drapion, but they actually don't do that. Which means maybe I can make it to a energy ball here. No, not quite. My opponent already has enough energy for a second move. They full send the play rough, and they're also staying in this matchup, which is strange. But now I can go for the energy ball. I can grab the shield. I can then snipe with the Stunfisk, and while discharge will not be enough to KO, it will put them in farm down range. So my opponent has to be wary about that. They then pivot into their Drapion, knowing that they have a pacing advantage here. However, we do have an energy lead on my opponent, and we have 2 shields remaining. And after they let that go, I see a win con, and that is my opponent cannot make it to back-to-back Aqua Tails right here before I get the full farm down. And because I don't throw the energy, I'm actually able to get the full farm down. My opponent knows I have so many discharges loaded, so they just resign the match. Another Drapion on the lead, seeing these things absolutely everywhere, which is why we're trying to core break all these teams that are weak to both ground and electric. They do my opponent is playing it out the same way the last opponent did, and they actually go for a catch at the exact same time, but this time onto an Azumarill. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to chip with a discharge, and then I'm going to come in with my Slurpuff because that will put it in energy ball range, and I know I can live one charge move. My opponent ends up over farming here, allowing me to get to an energy ball first, which does connect, and that looks like that probably puts them in farm down range. Maybe not quite. It's going to be close. If we got the debuff on their defense, it certainly would, but it looks like 2 ice beams will not be enough to KO, so I'll let a second one go. And if I'm not able to get switch here, that is okay. I will throw at the very last second to minimize my opponent's farm if they do decide to let this go, but they do commit the shield. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get an energy light lead on Golisopod, because Golisopod and a Drapion is a fine matchup as long as we have an energy lead. My opponent does make it to a crunch here, so I will shield this up, and it's just an Aquatail bait, which is a little unfortunate because that actually forces me to throw my energy a little bit earlier. However, Aqua Jet from this range will do massive damage, and my opponent lets that go. But I still think something is weak to the Golisopod in the back, so I end up shielding. It's another Aquatail bait, but I was wrong. It is a Furret in the back, and now I'm kind of wishing I saved that shield for the Stunfisk because they do have super effective Trail Blaze. I do at least have a Mud Bomb loaded, and we banked an Aqua Jet for later, so that is important. As long as I can get another charge move off here, then this game is over, and my opponent overfarms way too much, allowing me to get to a second Mud Bomb. If they had committed the Trailblaze early, yes, they wouldn't have been able to outpace, but they would have had a better chance here. They do finally make it to the Trailblaze. I have the charge move loaded. They do not switch into their Drapion, which is great, because now this Aqua Jet will be enough to KO. And now I can get the full Shadow Claw farm down before they're able to make it to move, and we are able to win that game. Another Drapion lead. Yeah, okay, this thing is absolutely everywhere. I mean, for good reason. It's an incredible Pokemon. On the lead, I still think it's better as a safe switch, but on the lead, I mean, yeah, you can see it a lot too. This opponent ends up staying in, and they actually make a catch onto the Lapras. So, this one went for better catch timing, and they do catch a Mud Bomb, which is okay because that does some okay chip, and that allows me to align my Golisopod onto their Lapras. Golisopod is able to connect with an X-Scissor. My opponent does overfarm perfectly, throwing one turn before I get to the next X-Scissor, but I can actually go one more Shadow Claw, go for the X-Scissor. From this range, it'll be enough to KO, and they can never outpace me here, so my opponent does just let that go. Back in comes the Drapion. They do throw right before I make it to my next move. My opponent is counting absolutely perfectly, and they know an Aqua Tail is enough to KO from that range. I can just come back in with the Stunfisk. I will be able to outpace because I banked a lot of energy from earlier when I was over farming, which is nice. Mud Bomb will be able to grab the shield, and the only tricky part here is they're at back-to-back charge moves. However, I think I can live one Aqua Tail, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to shield up, click the move, and now I can let this go. As long as I live this, then we are okay, and Stunfisk lives on 1 HP. We're able to get the Mud Bomb off. I need my opponent to let this go, but they shield, and that is rough, because now I have to come in with my Slurpuff, and my opponent is able to make it to an Aqua Tail here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to overfarm just a little bit, go for the Flamethrower right before they make it to their next Aqua Tail, but my opponent once again makes a really nice catch, but they catch onto Corviknight, and Corviknight is going to take super effective damage from the Flamethrower. I can only overfarm so much before they make it to an Iron Head, so here comes another Flamethrower. The one good thing for me is that I'm not quite in Aqua Tail range yet, so my opponent needs to make it to back-to-back moves, but I make it to the Flamethrower on the CMP tie when they make it to back-to-back moves. They're on 8 Poison Stings here, and it's only 4 to an Aqua Tail. So in comes the first one, but because it's CMP tie, I can connect with the Flamethrower, and that's enough to pick up the knockout on the Drapion, and we are able to take that win. Into the final match of the video, picking up a terrible lead, we see a Swampert, and they're staying in this matchup, and they're just going to connect with a Sludge before they hop out of this matchup, just so that they can maintain switch, which is a nice play, and they actually have a Beware in the back. So I'm going to overfarm here. Oh wow, okay, this is just not me knowing the Pokemon. I do not know the attack stat on Beware, so I was not expecting it to win CMP over Golisopod. Golisopod has a very high attack stat. So now I just shield that up. I know I can at least grab a shield for my opponent, unless they want to just give me switch, which I doubt they do, so they will shield that up, and which is why I threw right before. And my opponent makes a mistake. They actually throw, maybe not expecting that next Shadow Claw to KO, worried about me making another move, which is good because now I can come in with Slurpuff, get a huge energy lead, which is exactly what I need. Payback and superpower I'm not worried about, so just a stomp probably. No, my opponent ends up going for a superpower anyways. I am going to overfarm slightly here, now going for an energy ball right before they make it to their next charge move, which means I should be able to outpace in case they decide to shield this up. And my opponent does shield that up, so maybe hinting to the fact that they're weak to Fairy in the back. But I do need to get rid of this Swampert, and Slurpuff is the only way I can do that. So I overfarm as much as I can. I'm going for the knockout here with the energy ball. And now what is that Pokemon in the back is the question, and it is a Malamar. They are weak to Fairy. I'm able to make it to another energy ball, and from this range it'll do probably about 50% of the Malamar. Oh, there's a shadow, so a little bit more, and I can survive 2 moves comfortably here because Stunfisk is really bulky. Here comes one charge move. I just have to watch for a catch. My opponent does go for it at the exact right time, but I hold on to my energy. I'm able to make it to a Mud Bomb here, and from this range Mud Bomb picks up the knockout on the Malamar, and we are able to take that win. So yeah, that's Unova Stunfisk, and that's its ability to core break teams. You noticed in these matchups, I won a lot of leads, and that's just kind of how I felt with this Pokemon. Unless you run into a Mud Slapper on the lead, like, it's pretty much a good matchup. Like, any ground obviously is bad. Waters are okay. Grass is obviously terrible. Ice is okay because of what the ice are in this meta. A lot of the ice are water. Think like Dugong, Lapras. So a lot of them are also weak to Stunfisk. Those are neutral, but we have Glizzbot in the back, which covers your water and your ice weakness by resisting those, and then it has super effective coverage with X-Scissor for your grass. So a very good solid core there. And yes, Glizzbot doesn't want to see things like Jumpluff, but Stunfisk walls the typical moveset of Jumpluff currently for most of them that are on Aerial Ace and Acrobatics. So that core really is very strong. If you saw it on PvPoke in my first slide, those two make nearly a perfect core, and then I was just having fun with Slurpuff. Slurpuff, though, does have the coverage for Stunfisk weaknesses, right? It's weak to ice, so you have Flamethrower. It's weak to water, so you have Energy Ball. What else is it weak to? Ground, you have Energy Ball. So it has the coverage that you would want in that for that Pokemon. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me from this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, peace.